Australian. Hey?
Today's video is going to be a little bit different as I'll be taking a look at the role these Australian helicopters played in the Vietnam War. I had grand plans for this kit in terms of aftermarket upgrades and scratch building, control and fuel lines, but it soon became apparent that this was going to be more work than I was willing to invest in it, so I set about getting something presentable on the display table. Now, interestingly, the Aussies named this helicopter the Possum. Also, be sure to stick around here for the display base section because I'll be talking you through that from a technique point of view, and it's worth the wait. I'd also encourage you to stick around at the end because this was part of a group build and I'll share some of the other photos that the other guys presented. When Australia expanded its military commitment to Vietnam in 1966, air mobility became central to how its forces would operate. The establishment of the 1st Australian Task Force at Nui Dat in Phuoc Toi province, I hope I've pronounced that right, required a reliable aviation element capable of moving troops, supplying forward positions and evacuating casualties under combat conditions. This role was fulfilled by the Royal Australian Air Force through the deployment of 9th Squadron RAAF. 9 Squadron arrived in Vietnam in June of 1966 and was equipped with the Bell UH-1 Iroquois. The UH-1 provided the Australian forces with a highly flexible platform that could be configured for troop transport, casualty evacuation and armed escort. From its initial base at Vung Tau and later in direct support of Nui Dat, the operational tempo for 9 Squadron was high. Aircraft were routinely committed to multiple sorties per day, often in difficult weather and under the threat of ground fire. The Huey's ability to land in relatively confined clearings made it well suited to the terrain of Phuoc Toi, but it still required a level of space and approach clearance that was not always available in dense jungle environments. Furthermore, its size and noise signature made it unsuitable for certain reconnaissance and observation tasks. In September 1965, the Australian Army deployed 161 Reconnaissance Flight to South Vietnam. This unit formed the core of Australian Army aviation capability in theatre and operated a mix of light aircraft including the Bell OH-13, this model, the Sioux, that I'm building, and they also included fixed wing platforms such as the Cessna 180. The Sioux was a light observation helicopter though, derived from a civilian design. It was unarmed and offered no ballistic protection for its crew. Its advantages lay in its simplicity, its manoeuvrability and the ability to operate at low speeds, at low altitudes for extended periods. The characteristics made it well suited to reconnaissance and artillery observation tasks, particularly in the heavily vegetated terrain of Phuoc Toi province. The primary role of 161 Reconnaissance Flight was to provide aerial observation in support of ground forces. This included locating enemy movement, identifying tracks and signs of recent activity, and directing artillery fire onto its targets. Sioux's crews were routinely tasked with flying low-level reconnaissance ahead of the ground units. Once enemy positions were identified, they would remain on station to adjust artillery fire, providing corrections that allowed Australian guns to engage with the high degree of accuracy. This role required the aircraft to operate in a predictable pattern though, often circling above an area of interest while maintaining visual contact with the ground. As a result, Sioux helicopters were particularly vulnerable to small arms fire. Their low operating altitude placed them well within the effective range of rifles and machine guns, and the lack of armour meant that even light calibre rounds could cause significant damage. In addition to reconnaissance and artillery spotting, the Sioux, or as the Australians called it, the Possum, was also employed in a limited casualty evacuation role. Now, while the UH-1 or the Huey was the primary platform for medical evacuation, there were situations in which landing zones were too restricted to accommodate a Huey. In these cases, Sioux, or Possums as I said, aircraft were used to extract wounded personnel using externally mounted stretcher pods. Think of the helicopters out of MASH. These missions were particularly hazardous as they often involved landing or hovering in confined spaces under combat conditions with no protection for either the crew or the casualties. The relationship between 9 Squadron and 161 reconnaissance flight was therefore complementary. The Sioux provided the observation and coordination necessary to identify the shape of the battlefield, while the Huey delivered the mobility and combat support required to act on that information. In practical terms, this meant that a typical operation might begin with a Sioux conducting the reconnaissance over a suspected area, followed by artillery engagement directed from the air, and then the insertion of the infantry by the Huey once the situation had been assessed. Throughout the period of 1966 to 1971, both units operated continuously in support of Australian Allied forces. The tempo increased significantly during major campaigns such as the Tet Offensive, where the demand for aerial observation and rapid troop deployment intensified. Despite their differences in aircraft and role, both units were exposed to the same operational risks, including hostile fire, challenging weather conditions, and the inherent difficulties of flying in a complex and often unpredictable environment. By the time Australian forces began withdrawing from Vietnam in 1971, 161 reconnaissance flight had flown thousands of operational sorties, providing a persistent aerial presence over Phuoc Tuy province. 9 Squadron had similarly accumulated a substantial operational record, transporting troops, evacuating casualties, and supporting ground operations across the region. In historical accounts of the Vietnam War, the UH-1 Huey has become the dominant symbol of helicopter warfare. The Sioux, however, by contrast, occupies a less prominent place in the narrative, but its contribution was fundamental. Without the reconnaissance and observation provided by this reconnaissance flight, the effectiveness of artillery and coordination of ground forces and situational awareness of commanders would have been significantly reduced. The Huey enabled action, but the Sioux made that action possible by providing the information on which it depended. During its deployment, 161 reconnaissance flight flew in excess of 72,000 hours. 37 of these Possums were sent to Vietnam, flying 43,911 hours over 66,066 sorties. 8 Sioux were shot down and damaged beyond repair during this time. Hopefully you've been enjoying the build that's been going on the background and have a little more information around the contribution these Aussie choppers made to the war effort. There were too many flaws in this kit to name, but a couple of things to note was the overscale tail framework that was covered in moulding flash, the basic detail in the parts, the air bubbles in the clear canopy, and the fact that that didn't really fit particularly well over the cabin section really made this a bit of a nightmare. Also, inconsistencies in the instructions was really not pleasant, but that aside, it was great. If you have any questions about the build or finish or any techniques I've used there, please ask them in the comments down below. But let's get on to some dedicated modelling.
Hasta la Possum, baby!
Presenting an average model on a nicely dressed base can make a huge difference to the presentation, and in this case it was the only hope I had to salvage this one, or at least that's how I was feeling about it. For the base, a small, inexpensive timber frame provided the footprint I was looking for and was easy enough to stain using a black stain and a sponge. Generally speaking, a dark base can ensure the focus is on the model and not on the base itself, or at least a darker tone of timber works as well. Marston mat is a pressed metal plate that's used to shore up the groundwork and create makeshift runways amongst other things. This section I have here comes from the mini art kit and would make for the perfect groundwork for what I was thinking of building here. I was initially going to put this on a circular base and cut the mat with a hole saw and the square section with a drop saw, just in case the circular one didn't work out. This was the shape that I decided on though, the square shaped one. The mat had been primed in a Mr. Surfacer black and then painted in dark iron, as this was used to build up my base colour. By airbrushing this in a mottled fashion, I'm able to use that black primer to influence the overall colour, giving me variation to the finish. The colour is then expanded using NATO brown to bring it more towards that oxidised, rusting look that it can get that I'd seen in reference photos. Applying this layer again in a mottled fashion creates depth to the finish, but I can also build up multiple passes of that colour that will enhance the way it looks, almost giving me a second colour. However, the second and third pass were applied over more random panels for this next stage.
Yellow can be added to the NATO brown, and another layer of that brighter colour is added in a similar fashion as previously, only this time it's over a smaller surface area. Now, to create a sense of geometry and variation, I set about masking random panels using Tamiya tape. I can then add a touch of ivory to that NATO brown yellow mix and create an even lighter colour to that palette. And removing masks is always a rewarding part of painting a model.
Landing strips and roads in display bases always benefit with line markings. It's just something to break up the lines on the shapes and add some variation. So a quick mask was made and a layer of chipping fluid was applied, and then around 5 minutes later I could blow in the white. When working over chipping fluid, be careful not to flood the model, because if it's too wet or heavy, it can reactivate the chipping fluid and affect your ability to work with it. Again, after around 5 minutes to allow that white to dry, I could get a wet and old brush and start scrubbing at it to begin the chipping. The embossing in the plate visually made the line look crooked, so I checked it with a rule and confirmed it was just my eyes playing tricks with me. Popping that Marsden matte or PSP element into the frame was quite satisfying, and after taping up the timber, I could move to dry pigments to start to create the look of the South Vietnamese soil. I used a combination of dark dust and earth from SMS. Now, SMS, for those of you who haven't heard of them, are an Australian manufacturer kicking big goals around the world, so be sure to check out their products. I'll leave a link down below for you. The dry pigment will combine and complement each other, creating variation in those base tones. It's always a good idea to use 2 or so colours with your pigments for that very reason. Because the dry pigment is, well, dry, I need to set it in place with something, and that is done with diluted enamel washes, dark brown and a light rust colour, with the white spirit as the carrier. By dabbing the brush against the surface, it allows capillary action to disperse that liquid through the dry pigment and detail, but it also means the nice natural piles of that pigment shouldn't be disturbed. Let the brush and the liquid do all of the work. It will often look overly dark at this stage, but once it dries, the look tends to brighten up and lighten down. So when using pigments, it can often be about being patient and trusting in the process. In the meantime, I'd been working on creating other elements for this base. I downloaded the palettes and the oil drums from a website called Cults 3D. Again, if you haven't seen it, go check them out. They got some great stuff on there. And proceeded to print them on my Hallett X1 3D printer. They had been primed in a black and then painted in an olive drab with a little bit of highlighting, and some chipping was applied using the sponging method and rubber black acrylic paint. The finish on these palettes I was particularly proud of, actually, and you'll see in a minute, but they were first primed black and then painted in a buff for the base coat. I can then use small dots of oil paint, which is industrial earth, and a shadow brown, and I'm using these to create grain in this timber palette. By using a flat brush moistened with a white spirit, I can start blending the oils in a back and forth motion. and start to get a timber grain look together using this technique. By working with the way that the bristles are moving the paint and the way that the paint is being removed and distributed, as well as being careful not to flood the system with too much white spirit, I'm able to create a pretty authentic looking timber grain, I think. The little Aussie pilot was inspired by a historical photo that I had that was uploaded to ChatGPT for some reference around the uniform, and then I channeled through the prompts around the look of the pose and the facial expressions it had, and once I was satisfied, I could bring that into a program called Meshy to create the 3D file. I'll upload this file for my killer kangaroos over on the Patreon page to use on their own models. Patreon currently has a few tiers available, each with their own unique rewards. But the best thing I'm finding over there is the awesome bunch of guys there and the community we've built. We're over there sharing ideas, plus it's a great resource for getting qualified answers and feedback around your own models. So be sure to join in there if that sounds interesting to you. Again, there are links down below. The figure is being painted here with a mix of acrylics, mainly AK 3rd Gen acrylics, with the tonal layering using their ultramatte varnish to work as a glazing agent with the paint. I honestly can't believe the expression in this face and how it's coming together, and just how easy that was to create from essentially nothing. This 3D and AI technology evolving so quickly is literally redefining this hobby, whether you like it or not, and how we will access and use figures with our displays. But back to the base, and the elements are all starting to come together now. I'm looking to create balance and maintain some plausibility with the placement of everything. It's a process I always enjoy. Having elements spilling off the edge of a scene can imply the setting continues past the base itself. Now, the other thing it does is free up some space on such a small working area. The tighter the scene, without being cluttered, the more effective it tends to be. There is nothing worse than a vignette or a diorama with a load of dead space. The palette is cut in half, but it's still recognisable as being a palette, and that makes the base that little bit more interesting to look at. With a few final touches, I'm calling this one done. Given I'd started from a pretty low base with this Italeri kit, yeah, I know I should have known, but I still find it interesting how a good paint job has the ability to transform the look of an average model, well, at arm's length at least. As for the base, I'm so happy with how that came together. I like the balance and the composition and the different colour tones it allowed me to work with. There is a lot of very repeatable and simple techniques here that I've shown you, and I encourage you to all start having a play around with things like pigments and washes, and even have a play around on these programs like Meshy. Just as a decent paint job can go a long way to forgiving a basic model, so can a well presented and balanced little scenic base. Do you think you'll be trying any of these techniques though? And I'd love to know what you think about this style of video where I entwine a little bit of history through it. I'd love to know, so please let me know in the comments down below. This was part of a group build of a little club I'm involved with, so stick around at the end and I'll share with you some pictures of the other builders. There is an incredible standard of work there, one of them which literally won Best in Show at the New South Wales Scale Model Show. But thanks again for allowing me on your screens. I'll never ever take that for granted. And if you have made it this far, please ensure that you've clicked on the like button. Or if you don't like it, then why are you still watching? Anyway, onward and upward. This is the greatest hobby in the world. Share it with your family and share it with your friends, and let's be proud of what we do. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
And relieved with the outcome.